Hi and good morning. You know who this is. This is Cassidy, and I'm here on what's actually, it's snowing outside. It's cold enough outside right now that we're actually getting a little bit of snow, but it's going to warm up into the upper 40s. It's a little unusual that I'm coming to you with a video today, and the reason I'm doing that is because I want to show you some stuff. Yesterday I started writing about things that I've done in the past which have led up to where I'm at today. And I've kind of touched on this back and forth over the years, but I decided since I'm not really writing a lot at the moment, and I need something to kind of kick me and give me a little bit of inspiration. So this is kind of a way of going back and looking at my own history and saying, this is where I was, this is how I got to where I'm at today. And I made the comment that if you wanted to know how Annie and Carrie came about, you actually have to look at a couple of characters that I created a long time ago, and it goes all the way back to a novel that actually ended up becoming my first novel, Transporting, that I had said I actually started working on probably around 1986. So, 30 years in the making, what can I say? Really, it's just like that. Yeah, I'm all moving all this back. Boom, 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 boom. Getting it all the way back to the very beginning. I'll do that later. Let's get the manuscript. So this was my first novel, and as I talked about it, I actually went through like 4 or 5 different areas of getting from here, part 1, all the way to here, part 5. And a lot of part 4 and part 5 were all written in March of 2012, where I finished up this novel. At the time, it was a huge novel for me. It eventually came out to 277,000 words, which I've written stuff larger than that now. But at the time, when you don't really know what you're doing, this becomes a huge thing. And it was in this novel that I first started literally world building. And when I mean world building, I mean I was building new worlds. This is a science fiction novel that actually takes place on, for the most part, on different planetary systems. There's only a short part of it that actually takes place on Earth. Like the first chapter, and that's it, So, in order to make it work, I had to build the world. And I had to build the world. I had to build everything. It was incredible. And it made me understand just how difficult it is to create something from scratch and flesh it out and make it, incredibly vivid and living. So I'm going to show you a little bit of how I actually got there. And all of it started right down in here with University Star System. When I created my world, University, it was a star, it was a system within the Hyades star cluster, which is about 130 light years from Earth. And I picked that because it's a loose star cluster. So you have all of these stars, maybe 100 or so, all within like 2 or 3 light years of each other. Which means you actually have habitable, or possibly habitable systems where humanity could gather and create a new world. And that was really all I had to start with. So I had to do my research to kind of figure out where would be a good place to actually build this. Now, when I started on this back in the 80s and 90s, you got to remember, there really wasn't much of an internet. So you had to go out and start hunting for this stuff in libraries and star catalogs. And as I mentioned, a lot of it was I would pick up books on stars and books on orbital calculations and bring them home, and especially the stuff with orbital calculations, I would start feeding information into an Excel spreadsheet. And it would sometimes take days to make certain that the formula I was creating matched up with some of the information they gave you to determine, am I on the right track? And it was quite extensive. I don't have any of that stuff now. That all is on a computer that was probably 4 computers ago. But here's what I started out with. This was actually the first stuff I came up with. And as you can see, I decided upon, originally it was called HIP 13806. That was based upon whatever catalog I got the information out of. Nowadays, we understand CL Melody 25136, which is actually the new star that I went to, is HD 23805. And you can find these in a catalog. I mean, if you type in HD 23805 or CL Melody 25, and you're going to find these. You'll find them. And the stellar coordinates and everything are correct. I went with those because they are G5 stars. It's close to what we have for our own star. I believe the sun is a G3. I have to look that up. I don't remember. But you could see that I actually went from one star to another, because if you look at the RA and the declination and everything is off, they're a little different. But that was how I did it. And as I went along, I decided University is going to be the 4th planet in a system of 5 orbiting the star. Here are the inner and outer planets. And University would have 2 moons, Ula and Melling. And those were the distances. It has a 28-hour day. That was one of the things I decided upon early on, is people were going to have to get adjusted to the day. And you'll hear folks talking about it's 13 hours, it's 14 hours. They have to go by a 28-hour clock. Because you can't go up to 14 hours and then say it's 2 p.m. That's a rather Earthian thing. So each planetary system has its own time. I mean, you could grow up in a world where the day goes by in 18 hours, and then you come to a place like this, and you have a 28-hour day. And that affects how you keep track of your calendar. If you'll notice, the length of the year is 394 days, but I say that's galactic standard. And the galactic standard I'm working off of is the length of an Earth day. It's how many days it would take to go around the star based upon if you had a 24-hour day, which is galactic standard. That's an Earth day. Local standard is how many days it takes to go around the star based upon your own time. So if you have a 28-hour day, you're going to go around your own sun in 337.7 days. And I worked out that every 10th year, you would have a leap year. You would have to. You would have to have a leap year that at that point to be able to figure out where you're at. And as I pointed out, the GS year is the galactic standard year. So if you're keeping track of time, it's 3182 in my story. Yes, it's that far in the future, 3182. So distance from Earth, or Terra as I call it, 130.8 light years. Closest star was 277. I was basing this off of information that I was actually getting out of a catalog. Population, not even quite 500 million people. It was first settled August the 10th, 2403. Penningham, which you hear about, and the first campus is New Oxford. One of the things I determined for University is that it would be this place that was just loaded with schools. And as you can see, there are all sorts of schools here. It would be loaded with schools so that people from all over what I was calling the empire could come here to study. And Oxford University launched one of the first expeditions to this planet and formed New Oxford, which is where most of the action takes place. And in reality, what they basically did was they created the campus system on this planet that you have in Oxford, which means when you say New Oxford, you're actually talking about dozens of colleges in the same area. Because if you look at Oxford University, that's how it is. There's just dozens of universities all around the town. So when you say, well, I went to Oxford University, you could actually turn around and go, which one? Because they're all kind of interrelated. And this was just a little bit of information of how I actually determine how to calculate dates going from galactic standard to local standard. And here are some of the schools. Cambridge actually came, so did Stanford, so did Princeton, Gorbachev Polytechnic, Hong Kong Polytechnic, they came out there. Miskatonic Galactic, I had to throw that in there. Yes, there is actually a real university on this planet called Miskatonic University. I had to throw that in. And then some of the other planets, New London is where the center of power is, and that's around the planet, the star Altair, which we can see is 54 light years away. Scoth is the home planet of one of my characters, Cytherea Warrington, who is the Duchess of Scoth, a title she inherited from her mother. And so Scoth is it's 159 light years away. And it's in orbit around Titare. So this was how I actually started out. This is where it started. New Oxford itself, as you can see, I have this whole history that I wrote up. And I worked off of this to be able to put a lot of my story together. It's kind of amazing when I think about the fact that I actually wrote all this stuff. I mean, gosh. This part here, my world building, that was probably stuff I began developing in the late 80s. And then one of the other things, because the society in transporting is actually based upon a royalty-based system where people have titles and ruling is done through pretty much hereditary lines. I had to actually know what all of these different titles meant and how you should address people when you meet them. Because I think as Americans, we're not used to these titles, and it kind of drives us crazy because we'll say things that it's all wrong. We'll get all kind of nuts about what we're actually saying. So I had to figure out, in terms of royalty, here are your two biggest royalty, king or queen or prince or princess. Your majesty, your royal majesty, your highness, that sort of thing. And then you get down into nobility, where you're talking about dukes, marquis or marchioness. Yes, that is a true thing. Earls or countess, viscount. And all of this was information, actually, you find out. Terms of rank, baronet and knight. So, when you hear about somebody being knighted, this is the one we know the most. People are knighted. They're sir or dame. And then there is a difference between a noble and the peer. The peer is the person who actually holds it. My one character, Cytherea, actually is the peer. She is the Duchess of Scoth, because her mother was. And you'll find out that her mother actually died. So the title was through her mother's will, actually transferred to her. Now, this raises some interesting things, because her father is actually a duke as well, but he's the duke of another planet. And then he was also granted the title of Duke Scoth. So Cytherea's parents jointly held peerage over the planet. Her father is not a noble. He's actually a peer. They were granted dual peerage over the planet. And her father has never remarried, but the thing of it is, she has two brothers, one of whom who will eventually become the Duke of Scoth. And if he marries, the question then becomes, well, what happens to Cytherea's title? Is she still going to remain the Duchess of Scoth? Or will she renounce that title and allow it to pass as a noble title to her brother's wife, who would be her sister-in-law? Or will she hang on to it and just be a bitch? So here you can see, this was a lot of where I got my sources from. Yes, even back then, I was working hard on this stuff. So, what does university look like? I wanted to actually take you through and show you the system. And one of the ways I did that, now originally, like I said, the system existed only as a number of things written down on paper, distances from the stars, how long it would take. And as time went on, I began adding more and more to this, basically because our knowledge of our own solar system expanded. So as it expanded, I began expanding this, and I also began using software to develop the system. And this is Astrosynthesis 3.0, which has, in its final form, was last updated, I think, in late 2015. So it's been around for 3 years without any updates. And I've noticed there's a few bugs in here, but for what I'm using it for, it's fine. If you are a science fiction writer or science fiction geek, or both, and you want to build a star system, this is it. I was, as I had mentioned, when I got my first copy of Astrosynthesis, and I started building the university system, I discovered my numbers were only off by about 1% in terms of time it would take to go around the planet and everything else. I was really impressed by that. I was impressed by the fact that I was that close when I was putting all this together. And the nice thing you can see is you can add all this information in here and then add additional contents to the stellar system. So this is what we end up with, is the university system. And this is it from way far out. As you can see up here, I'm 226 AU out. That's quite a way. How far? That's quite a ways out. A long ways out. One of the things I set up is that there's two main asteroid belts, an outer belt and an inner belt. The inner belt is mostly a combination of rock and some ice, whereas the outer belt is mostly ice. Betathon is a small planetoid. Nix is really the first planet that is part of the system as itself. This is the group of 7 right here. Betathon is just a small planetoid, which could be used as an outpost. It's often used as a marker for this is the furthest out you actually go from the system. And as you can see, there's some planetary tilt in my system. For some reason, the outer belt has a tilt to it. But see, I can go in and I can check on this. My orbital property says, oh, it's because of this. I've got an inclination of 6 degrees. I shouldn't have an inclination of 6 degrees, but I do. I'm just going to leave it. Again, that's one of the things that you can do is move stuff around. So I'm going to move into the interior. And we're going to show you what I have. Boom. There we go. So this is the inner four planets. Hotspur, which is designed primarily as, it's kind of like a Mercury planet, and they use it for mining. Fanner is the same way, though not quite as hot. Nearling is actually a Venus-type world with a ring system. And then, of course, the fourth planet out in the habitable area of the solar system is University. Now, as you can see, anything that's highlighted in yellow means there are actually people living there. So all of our system worlds have people living on them. Crimson and Clover, I'll get to those eventually. But you can see I'm 3 AU out looking over the top of the star system. One of the other nice things about this is you not only can determine all of the information for each of the stars, but you can actually create a planetary surface for each of these stars as well. You can create something that looks like that. Or, here's Fanner. As you can see, it has a very thin atmosphere. Very thin. It's actually a little bit of oxygen there, but not a lot. 24%, but it's real thin, so who cares? Actually, I should adjust that. That's why you have these two cloud structures here. Nearling, as I said, it's a Venus-like world. Does not have any satellites of its own, but it does have a ring system. So at some point during its formation, those rings were little moons that broke up. As we move further out, we get to Helos and Galeta. Helos is primarily a large planet, very large planet. It also has a pretty good density, so it's actually used for mining. It's not a Jupiter-type world. The mean temperature here is a little high. That shouldn't be right. I need to change that. How did it get so high? I think I did that because it's a rocky world, and I didn't want to change it. So let's bring this down a bit. We'll bring this down to 100C. See, this is one of the nice things. It actually has an atmosphere, but only, 1/16. And as you can see, it added clouds when I did that. That was probably one of the reasons why I did not want to. Here's a mining station. And you'll also see I have the 9th Fleet. The 9th Fleet uses Helos as a staging area from time to time. There are several fleets because I have a galactic empire, sort of. It stretches across about 400 light years. So this system has 2 rings. The mining station actually mines stuff off of the surface, plus it mines materials out of the rings. The rings are primarily composed of rocky material with a little bit of how should I say it? Ice in it, yeah. And as you can see, there are 2 outer worlds that are highly inclined to the system itself. The mining station and the fleet generally orbit in an equatorial orbit. They're out quite a ways. Trenton is actually 15,000 kilometers, and the fleet itself, that's not much of a fleet, but it is. The fleet itself is actually comprised of about 40 ships. and it orbits inward. I think it gets to within like 3,000 or 4,000 kilometers of the mining station. So, but this is how it looks. And talking about mining stations, then we come to Galidia, which has more. This is a gas giant, and this is the only gas giant in the system. And there actually should be a mining system in orbit around this planet to siphon off gas. So let's see what we can do about that. The ring system is out 58,800 kilometers. So there was supposed to be a gas mining station in orbit just outside the rings here, and I'll put it in later. Lucinda has its own mining station as well, because this world is a little moon, and it's actually pretty large. 4,000 kilometers is pretty large. So they mine it for ice. The space station is 20,000 kilometers up. They mine it for ice. There's also water on this planet under the ice. As you can see, this is stuff that we didn't know when I first started putting this novel together. And now I do know it. So as I built the world originally, I began building the world even more, simply because we began to learn more about our own solar system. And when we learned more about our solar system, I began to add it to this solar system. And you'll discover that one of the most precious commodities in any solar system is water, especially if you live in areas where there's no freestanding water. This would be used to get water to any of these people living in these areas out here. And in some cases, to anyone living on these planets here too. And since there's tons of ice out there, mega, giga, pecatons of ice, picatons actually, jotatons, if we really want to get crazy about it. They're constantly shipping ice to these different worlds so it can be melted and converted into water and taken down to planets to allow them to flourish. Water is your most precious commodity when it comes to colonizing a solar system. Without it, you're not going anywhere. If people don't have water, they're not going to survive very long. And if you have comets, if you have an Oort cloud, if you have icy bodies within your world, you've got water. You've got plenty of water. And as we know now, we even have two moons that are basically frozen oceans, except there's water underneath the ice, which could be kilometers thick. Europa and Enceladus are two water satellites. And Europa, I actually believe, has more water when you combine it all together. Theoretically has more water than Earth. So that could be important in the future, that you don't want, you could use that water. You could also use it depending upon your propulsion system of your rockets. You can actually use it as a propellant. It's not the fuel. It's what you could use to thrust with. If you read 2010, not the movie, but if you read the book, you find out that there was actually a Chinese rocket that was sent to Europa, and they flew there nonstop, basically leaving them with only enough fuel to make a landing on Europa. And it was figured out, because of the type of engines they were using, which were a nuclear pile, they were going to drill into the ice in Europa, siphon off water, and they were going to use that as their propellant. That was what they were going to inject through their nuclear core and use that for thrust, which, you could do. If you have a nuclear drive like that, yeah, that was what they determined, is that once they established a foothold on Europa, they didn't have to worry about fuel. They could just fill their tanks whenever they felt like it. A lot of people have looked at Europa and now Enceladus as staging areas for flights around the solar system, because if you could get the water out, depending upon your drive, you can use it for thrust. That's all you really need. The nuclear plant itself is the fuel. The propellant is what you push out the back. And in this case, they just heat it up to an incredibly active steam and push it out the rear end of their spacecraft, and there you go. You learned something. We could do that. They could do that here, but they don't need to. The technology is enough that they're actually using like antimatter drives to get from one place to another, and it's possible for their ships to hit as high as 20, 30 Gs. Something similar to what you saw in the movie, the TV show The Expanse, or if you read The Expanse books. And a lot of what I was working on, even going back 10, 15 years, is now stuff that you're seeing or reading about in The Expanse. Ice mining and living in the outer colonies and all that other stuff. It's really exciting. I won't say I got there first, but I got there first. No, I didn't actually. This is the outermost world, and as you can see, it's pretty much also an ice ball. They don't have to worry about their shipping water. They just crack ice and make their own water, and has a thin atmosphere, very thin. They use it mostly for a research station, because why wouldn't you? Crimson and Clover are just small planetoids, and these are used as both research centers and as shipping areas. It's sort of like Crimson especially is used for a lot of mining operations into the inner belt. Clover not so much, but it can be, because you do have a number of asteroids that get into these highly inclined orbits, and they sort of use that as a staging area as well. And Crimson and Clover, because obviously somebody liked classic rock way back then, or I should say way up then, like the 2500s, 2400s, 2500s, and decided to name these. So they're asteroids with a population, 3,000 people. That's a lot. Has a population there of 1,000. Clover actually has a population of 3,000. Crimson has what you would call a variable population, simply because they have ships going in and out of there all the time. But the main one here that we're concerned with is University. And this is the University system. It's outer moons, it has two, and something called the University Transfer Station. The University Transfer Station is where all your ships come in from outside, and they dock here. It's essentially a spaceport. It's the big spaceport in orbit around the planet to be able to accommodate visitors coming and going. In fact, it has a population of 7,500 people, so it's a fairly active locale. As you can see, the map that was created, my world has ice caps. It's mostly water, as you can see. It's actually 68% water. So it's a relatively good planet to live on. Fairly temperate. And in fact, the first landing area, surprisingly enough, most of the action takes place right in here. The first landing area, the spaceport, is like right there. The university, the main area where the schools are kept, is right in this area. And then all of this area here is what is known as the Roston Plateau, which is a very high area of the world. Probably, it's like the Tibet of this world, you might say. I don't know why it says minus 396 days. That's kind of weird. See, like I said, there's some glitches in this. There's a few glitches in here. I don't know why. This is all the information you put together to determine. You can see it's a lower gravity than Earth. It's kind of the mean temperature actually is around 24°C. And if we look at that, the actual mean temperature around the planet is about 75 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's pretty nice there. Makes for a cool environment, but it's pretty nice there. And there are, like I said, there are universities all over this planet. What I should actually do is I can actually get a skin of the world, which I'm going to save right here. As you can see, here's the world laid out. I can enlarge it. Boom. Waiting for it to enlarge here. Come on. There you go. And I could actually do a map of the world showing where all these different areas are. And as you can see, you know, mountains, mountains, mountains. Very mountainous world. Be nice if it was able to actually scale it. Wish I could. You can't though. And I can generate the atmosphere. Watch this. See? Clouds. Again, this was something that I had hand-drawn maps of this whole area, and it was quite unusual. Can view it in a globe. Oh, don't have the globe. I have to install the globe viewer. I forgot where I can get that from. But anyway, this is it. I could export it as a graphic and actually bring it up and put like the different locations around here if I wanted to. So I'd have an additional map so I would know where everything is, because I'm like that. This is an important thing, because if you're going to create, especially something like this, if you're actually going to create a planetary system, you want to make it believable. I've seen a lot of stupid things that people have done in the past. And I have also seen some rather incredible things done. One of the things that really got me interested in world building goes all the way back to the Larry Niven Known Space series, where he created all these incredible worlds that fit within the criteria of his stories. And what had ended up happening was, when they were looking for extrasolar planets to inhabit Earth, that is, they sent out ships that could travel at a fair percentage of the speed of light to be able to get to worlds. So, like when it went to Tau Ceti, you know, you're talking about 11 years to get there. 12 years probably closer, and then 11 years for the signal to come back. So like 25 years total for information to come back to say, yes, we found habitable areas on the planet. It's habitable. And what he had created was the specifications that the probes going out were looking for habitable places for humans. Didn't necessarily mean the entire planet was habitable. They were just looking for habitable spots. So you had home around Alpha Centauri, which was the most Earth-like of all the worlds out there. But then you had Mount Look at That, which was around, I believe that was around Tau Ceti. And it was basically a gigantic Venus world with one plateau that stuck up outside the clouds and was in an area where the atmosphere was breathable and was about the size of the state of California. So they settled there. You also had We Made It, which was named that because the ship barely got there. It's in orbit around Procyon. And you find out that they live underground there simply because at some point, the way the axis points through the primary star, you get these incredibly high winds. When the probe first examined the planet, the winds weren't there. By the time they got there, they found out you'd have like 1,500 mile an hour winds that would scour everything. So they learned to build underground. They had to. And the gravities of these planets were completely different. Jinx around Sirius has a gravity that's about 2.5 times that of Earth, so people who come from there tend to be short and stocky, whereas We Made It had a gravity of 0.68 that of Earth's, about a third less. So everybody there is like real tall, and because they live underground, albinoism tends to affect everyone. So you have all these like 7-foot tall people who are albinos walking around, and it's like that with all of his worlds. And I loved the detail, and I loved how some of these places where people lived, it was pretty tenuous. One of the more incredible ones that came from the Ringworld Engineers, I believe, was Canyon. It was like, it had been created by a gigantic weapon during the Earth-Kanzini Wars. And it was this huge gash in an otherwise uninhabitable world that was something like, 100 kilometers long and maybe like 10 kilometers deep, or deeper than that. And there was enough of an atmospheric density in the canyon that people could live there. So they actually had this entire society of like 1 million people, millions of people actually living on the edge of this canyon wall. And digging into the world as well, but that's where they lived because there was atmosphere there. It's that kind of world building that I love. I just recently finished The Expanse, and I found the whole process of how they put everything together incredible as well. And in order to make this story that I wrote over a course of like 20 years seem believable, I had to create believable worlds. It took time, but it was worth it. And what I learned from building this world, I put forward when I was building the world of the Foundation. A lot of people have said, you put a lot of effort into creating this world. I sure did. But the Foundation world is a believable world. It really is. I find it actually far more believable than the Harry Potter world, especially when they're doing stuff like playing a Quidditch match out in the open with everything invisible. How do you do that? Or how do you build a gigantic Quidditch stadium and bring in tens of thousands of revelers near the White Cliffs of Dover, and no one notices this stuff? It's actually far more believable, I think, in my world that they're able to hide, like the School of Salem. They actually hide it. Some of the stuff is visible. School of Salem, we'll just put it inside this gigantic nature preserve, but it's not. It's actually part of the preserve, so no one notices the walls. There's a little bit of chicanery there. It's not invisible. It's there. You just don't know it. So that's kind of how I got to where I'm at today. This is a little bit of my history. And then tomorrow, I want to talk about how I developed the characters of Cytherea Albert and another character as well, whose name I'm not going to mention yet. And kind of how that sort of drifted into creating Annie and Carrie. So we'll talk about that tomorrow. Hope you like this. I hope you found it enjoyable. Hope it wasn't too long. And I'll talk to you later. Bye.